to jump back and forth as as possible. But I am multitasking here, so bear that in mind. If something's really urgent, I guess ask in both. Having stalled long enough, let's go ahead and begin. So hi everyone, my name is Matt Kaufman. My day job is running a Salesforce consultancy. We also publish apps for Salesforce, and my side gig, so to speak, is being a GDG organizer. And I've been a community organizer with GDG for over 12 years now, and I enjoy it tremendously because I get to interact with people like you. And hopefully today you'll learn some stuff, because this is all stuff that I've learned as part of being a GDG organizer. And so I'm here to share that with you. These are things that I actually use for work as well. So it's always nice when some of the things that I learn on the side, whether it's hobby or personal, actually does apply to what I do for work. And in this case, Gemini does. So I'm excited about that. I have some more information on the screen there. You can see that. And let's jump to this slide. So this QR code is the same as the URL that I posted in the chat. If you go to that QR code, you'll go to the GitHub repo for this presentation, which I made based on some slides that were provided by Google. It has all of these URLs as well as more, but these are the high-level ones to kind of get started and be dangerous. And then there's a lot more if you go to the README in the GitHub repo. And like I said, I will come back to this slide at the end. We'll try to also share this on Bevy, and that way anyone who's late or their phone dies right after this event, they'll be able to get it there as well. So we'll make sure everyone has access to it. Okay, so this is what we're going to do today. I don't know how we're going to get it all done in time. I'll probably have to speak quickly, but I'll do my best to get it all done and get it done in a way that is not too fast. But we're going to go over some background knowledge, play with AI Studio. I'm going to attempt to build a web service and deploy it. We'll see if we make it all the way. But if not, you'll be able to do it too, because like I said, this presentation is available in the GitHub repo along with instructions on how to do it too. So hopefully we'll all be dangerous after this 1 hour. Okay, what is Gen AI and what is an LLM? So these are high-level concepts. Hopefully you're already familiar with some of this stuff if you're attending this call and you're interested in it already. But what we're talking about when we're talking about Gemini, we're talking about a very large language model that has all sorts of information. Basically, imagine scraping the entire internet, history of mankind, all that kind of stuff, and then giving it into this model so that we can ask it questions in our normal language, and it understands enough to be able to look through that entire model and then respond. Of course, there are going to be things that it can't respond because this is software that's being provided to us, and it's got controls in place, right? So if you ask it how to do things that are inappropriate, it's not going to answer. But for hobby and business purposes, for things that are productive for the world, it should be able to help. There's a lot of things that are going on there. For instance, like in this example here, it's able to complete our sentences, right? But it's also able to understand a question and then determine what the right response is and actually deliver that response, not just regurgitate an answer, but actually present the answer to you in an appropriate manner using the same language and all that kind of stuff. Here's another example. Roses are red, violets are blue, sugar is sweet. So this is not something that is inherently like natural, right? If you were to ask it like a math problem, one could argue, well, that makes sense because it can compute the math, right? But no, in this case, it actually, like I said, has essentially the history of the internet to go through and try to figure out when the average person says roses are red, what are they likely to say next? And the answer is violets are blue, sugar is sweet. Now that means that perhaps in 50 years, if somebody were to rewrite this poem and that rewritten version gets put all over the internet, more times than violets are blue, sugar is sweet is currently on the internet, then in 50 years, if you were to ask this question of roses are red, complete the sentence, it would respond differently. So it's just based on the information that's out there. You can use it for code generation. So this is something I do a lot. Most of you are probably familiar with a lot of the tools that are out there already. But for instance, in this example, if we were to say for let I equals 0, it should be able to complete it. Now, 10 may not be the number that we wanted. It's not able to read our minds. And if we had another variable right above this line, it might understand that we actually want to loop through the number of items in that variable, assuming it was an array or something. But in this case, it will just kind of guess. Here's what I think you want. Like I said, it's super large. So essentially, it is the entire internet. And so everything is in there. These are the types of things that it's really good at. Entity extraction. So you could go ahead and like give it some document and say, tell me how many times this word shows up in that document, or summarize this document for me. You can see that summarization. Classification. So here's a list of things. Do me a favor. Tell me how many times animals are listed and how many times cars are listed and all that kind of stuff. And it'll actually go through, interpret the data, although it doesn't necessarily have to be structured, and then be able to output something. Sentiment analysis. So based on the words that are being used, it compares that with what it understands and determines, is this person positive? Is this person negative? That type of stuff. There's just a question here I'm just looking at. I don't know if Marsha is available to type at the same time, but there are some questions that people are typing. We will get to the questions. I'm just trying to rush through pretty quickly. And then translation is another good one. So if you have used Google Translate already, you're probably familiar with the way that works. But you can feed it some text in one language and get text in a different language. It can even do images as well. And we'll talk about that too. Because we are interacting with it, typically using just our native language, so by asking it a question or typing it some type of prompt, it's a lot faster than if we were to have to just use code complete constantly, right? So you can imagine if we were having to use code complete, well, every line I'm going to have to type something to get the rest of that line. But you can actually just ask and say, you know what, write all this code for me. Here's what I need. And it'll go and do it for me. And so it allows us to try things out faster. That's basically what this is. Same thing. I often use it if I have to start writing a letter or an email. I'll use this as a starting point. I'm not necessarily going to take everything that it says and just send it off, but it allows me to kind of get past that phase of procrastination where I was like, I don't want to do this. Gemini or any AI tool is going to allow you to kind of get past that phase and just start moving faster. Here's an example. Explain the joke. So I used to be addicted to soap, and I'm clean now. And so the LLM can actually explain, as if we were not a native English speaker or not from this planet or something like that, why this is a joke and what's funny about it. And so you can see that, that's a very sophisticated process to be able to do that. Here's another idea. If you are kind of having writer's block or something like that, just ask it for ideas, ask it for things. It's going to be based on things that are already out there on the internet. So it's not going to actually come up with something that is, only creatable out of a human mind, but it's a starting point for you that someone else has already put out there. Just keep that in mind. Okay. So what's different about them? I've said it already. They're huge. These are huge models that take a really long time, essentially, for whoever's publishing them to build. But they understand. I don't know if that's the right word when you think about it, because we're not talking about a sentient entity, but they have the knowledge. Maybe that's a better way to say it, of all the words we use and their meanings, as well as when they're put together, how they change the meaning, and then all the information that has been recorded using those words and those sentences and stuff like that. And so with all of that, it's then able to understand the question or the prompt that's being given, do the research, so to speak, of answering that question, and then provide back in that same language and tone even a response that hopefully is accurate. And you can provide it with steering of how you even want that response. So you could say, make it more formal, make it less formal, things like that, make it a structured array, whatever it may be, and it'll follow those instructions. Multimodalities is, I think, where things get a lot more powerful. So rather than just asking questions and talking to a chatbot, or asking questions and just getting a response independent without any history, you can start to build out experiences where what might take a human a long time to do, the LLM can do in seconds. For example, I attended the Google Next conference last year, and there was an app, the Google Next app, where you could see the list of sessions and things like that, a list of attendees, all sorts of information was in this app. I wanted it in a more structured format, so I could put it in a spreadsheet, basically. And so what I did is that you could take a screenshot or a video using my phone, and then I fed that into Gemini and said, hey, can you turn this into a CSV? And it did. Now, I could have typed it in myself, and had my phone on one screen and my computer on the other, but I didn't need to. I could just ask Gemini to do it, and it was done in seconds. So being able to take audio, video, pictures, things like that, and run it through it saves you so much time. It's definitely worth it. All right, so that's the background. We're going to start getting dangerous now. So there is a website that you can go to. I'm going to jump to it in a minute, aistudio.google.com. You do need a Google account, so Gmail or Google Workspace account to use it. And once you're there, what you're using is a user interface that is really connecting to the API behind the scenes. So this is a user interface that Google is providing for people who don't want to write code or just want to test things out. And typically when I'm testing out a prompt, I want to test it out here because it's a lot faster for me to just test it here than for me to write a whole app just to test out my prompt and find out what I need to tweak it. And it is a lot of testing. So when you write a prompt, typically you do have to test it many times and tweak it a lot. I recently wrote a prompt to parse PDFs for a specific purpose, a specific type of document. And I had to tweak that prompt for probably 2 weeks. I did some testing, my coworkers did testing, and it was back and forth, a lot of testing. So it's a lot faster if you do it here, get it perfect here, and then go write your code. And so what you want to do now that we're kind of all caught up, hopefully, on this aistudio.google.com, I'm going to go ahead and escape out of this presentation, hopefully. There we go. And I'm going to jump to AI Studio. Oh, let's come here. And I'll just give you a quick tour. I'll try to zoom in a little. There we go. So some things to point out. I'm on create new prompt, and you can see there's even some starter points where you can kind of figure out what you want to do. On the right-hand side, we'll come to the Get API key in a second. On the right-hand side, I can choose my model, and there are some new models that are available now. But you can see here, there's different models. You can find out the difference between those models. There's a compare up here at the top. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's just type in finish this phrase or sentence. Let's say sentence. Roses are red. And I'm going to hit run. And let's see what it does. Roses are red, violets are blue. Boom. OK, great. Now I can also put system instructions at the top. And so this is, I could say something like that. Let's say speak like a character in Shakespeare. Spell that right? In a Shakespeare play. Now this may not make a difference in this particular case, but let's see. I'm going to copy this one again, and I'm actually going to just delete this and run it one more time. Let's do it one more time. There you go, right? So system instructions. Now, I could also have put that in the prompt itself, but typically system instructions are going to be things that kind of provide background to this particular prompt, whereas the prompt itself is like the one question I'm asking right now. I might ask another question in 5 minutes. I might ask another question in 10 minutes, and so on and so forth. And so you can kind of combine this. And then there's other ways of adding even more information, more background that are more advanced. But this is kind of just an example here. And then you can always give feedback if it's wrong or right. You can revise by editing it and so on and so forth. Let's check that. Okay, so here's some cool stuff. I'm gonna. This is all in the slides. I'm just kind of pointing it out. So one of my favorite features in here is get code. And look what happened. So when I hit get code, it actually writes the code for me to do what I just did in this user interface. Because again, this user interface is actually calling the API anyway behind the scenes. So essentially, it's using this code. And you can see here, this is what it's doing. It's using a model. In this case, this is the model that we're using. And it's saying, here's my system instructions. And then you can see here, this is the, in this case, this is a chat history. But if I were to, let's do this one more time. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And I'm going to delete this too. And then we'll just say, speak like, actually, let's finish the sentence provided, right? And now I'll say roses are red. And I think if I hit get code now, there, yeah. So you can see here, it doesn't have the response yet. But this is perfectly good code. I could go ahead and paste this into either Colab, which you can use right from here. I can also choose different languages or tools to use. So I tend to work in JavaScript, so we can see here. That's the example I'll be doing later. But whatever language you're interested in, you should be able to hopefully use one of these and get close enough to what you're used to. And then you can copy this and put this into your IDE and just start, making changes as needed. We'll try to get to that today. There's a link to API docs. There's a lot of other stuff on here: temperature, token count, JSON mode, etc. Not going to get into most of that today. The important thing that you do want to know is that this is the button, get API key, that you need to use before you can really use this tool or make calls to the API. So you need an API key. This is how we know that it's you and it's linked to a specific project and all that kind of stuff. So let me go ahead and click on that. So when you come here, it'll give you some guidance, but you can basically create API key, and you have to link it to a Google project, so a Google Cloud project. So you have to do that. There was a question on it, but the free tier for Gemini currently is very generous. So if you're really using this as a hobbyist and just to play with it and test things out, and you don't give out your API key, then you shouldn't have any charges. But yeah, so you're going to choose a project, and then you create the API key. It'll give you the long gobbledygook key, and you would just copy that, and then we'll use it later in the demo when we get to it. But once you've done that, you can just keep it here. You can see, you can view usage data and go to billing and things like that. But like I said, as long as you're really using it as a hobbyist and you're not using it for like an actual project that people are going to go to in the world, you should be fine. Okay, so jump through a couple slides there just now. Let's come to basic prompting, and we'll come back to the slideshow. Okay, so this is just some more examples. You can ask it to write a poem. So if you're having a hard time doing homework or writing a poem for someone that you care about, you could use it for that. I have to be careful. This is being recorded, but I may have used this to help me write birthday cards and thank you cards in the past. I won't say for sure if I have, but again, if you're procrastinating, it's a great way to kind of get past that first initial step. I use it definitely for code. Most of us probably are familiar with just doing a search and going to Stack Overflow or something like that and finding solutions. It's a lot faster. You don't have to sift through wrong answers or old answers, especially if there's like new versions of the languages and stuff like that. So again, I tend to write a lot in JavaScript. There are ways of doing things that are 10 years old, 20 years old. There's ways of doing things that are much more recent. And so this is a way to kind of find that out. And often what I'll do when I ask a question, I'll even specify what version of the language I want it to use. And that way I get the answer that I'm really looking for. Actually, let me go back one more. If you are a content creator, this can be great to come up with ideas of things to create content on, whether it's blog posts or videos or whatever, maybe. So from a business perspective, if you're really trying to create some meaningful functionality and create an app, you probably are going to not just have a single prompt. You're probably going to end up chaining prompts so that multiple things are happening. Using a single prompt with too large of a prompt, you don't get the results that you typically want. So the example I gave earlier, we had to parse PDFs. What I'm doing is I'm parsing the PDF, turning that into a structured data, so it's a JSON object, and then I pass that JSON object into another prompt that has some more information to do some analysis on the data. And you tend to get better results chaining prompts than trying to get a single prompt to do a lot. And there's different reasons for that, but some of it is also those settings that we saw on the right-hand side. Okay, here's some code generation examples. Let's just jump through some of these. Generate a table, so structured data. It's really good for creating structured data, whether it's a CSV, JSON, HTML, etc. It, again, has access to the entire internet. So you can go ahead and search for this, and you'll find a website that has it. There's multiple websites that have it, though. And recently, I actually looked for a list of countries, and it had a bunch that don't exist anymore. There was some old stuff on there, and so that was a waste of my time. I had to then go and delete the countries that were in that list that are no longer real countries. But had I asked Gemini to do it, I could have actually said only include countries that are currently still real countries or use their current names and not former names, things like that. So I should have done that, and I didn't. Here's another example, creating a SQL query. So I occasionally write SQL queries. I'm not great at it, especially the more complex ones with joins and halving and things like that. But you know, the LLM has access to every SQL query that's ever been published on the internet. So it's really good at writing SQL queries. And if you provide the data or the structure that you currently have, it'll be able to work with that. And so this is really easy. You can see here, if you provide the columns and the tables, it's able to then say, okay, this is what you want to do. So that saves you a lot of time. There's no typos in this either. If I were to type this out from hand, there could be typos in it. Let's keep going. Here's a great one, generate a Docker script. So my standard process for creating a Docker script is to look at the last one that I did. And if the last one wasn't like appropriate, then I look at a different one, or I have to search for one and try to find it. I guess you could argue there's nothing wrong with that process, but it is a little silly. And so this is essentially gonna, you know, create one from scratch for you, and you can specify exactly what you need, and hopefully it'll get it right. Unit tests. I don't like to write tests. I don't know if anyone does actually, but this is a great use of an LLM. Yes, you could hire a junior dev to do it, or an intern, but that's not really a best use of their time either. So why not have it done in seconds instead, by just asking the LLM for it. Here's an example of the unit test that it created. Okay, so this is where things, we tend to have a lot of questions on things when we talk about LLMs and AI. So obviously, it has a lot of information, but that model was completed on a certain day. And on that day, that's the end of its knowledge base. So if something really important happened the next day, it's not going to know about that. And so, you know, I think most of us at this point are familiar with that because we've all heard about ChatGPT and the different models and things like that. It's the exact same with Gemini and any other model you're working with. It's going to have a limit to how much it knows, and that limit is actually time or date based and not you know, size necessarily, but it's really based on the day that they said, okay, we're done. So that's one issue to keep in mind. And then it's not always correct is the other thing. So I mentioned earlier with the roses are red, it's going to say violets are blue because in the history of the internet, that tends to be what comes right after roses are red. But if over the next 50 years, we all want to mess with some LLM of the future, we could all start publishing as much as possible over the internet something else that says violets are green. right? And then maybe in 50 years, if you were to ask an LLM, it will say violets are green. The point is, it's not going to necessarily tell you the truth of the world. It's going to tell you essentially what's the most common answer, or what's the most likely answer based on all the information it has. It tends to be correct. It's not always correct. It really depends on the question. It really depends on how you phrase the question too. And I've found that sometimes even just putting things in a different order will yield different results. It does not have access to private data. So if you ask the LLM a question like, what is my driver's license? It's not going to know that. Even if my driver's license is on the internet, which it might be, because I think a lot of things are on the internet at this point, most of those security type of things are being filtered out. So it's not going to know that, and you should be able to get that out of it. You probably can answer how many characters are in a driver's license, and then it'll probably respond saying it depends on which state, that type of thing. But it might be able to tell you generic information, but it won't be able to tell you specific private information. You can feed more information into your prompt. Going back to that screen we were on before, I'm not on it right now, but in AI Studio, we had those system instructions at the top. We could feed information as part of the system instructions. We could also feed things in the prompt. You basically can shove everything into that prompt up to the limits of what tokens you have, and give it all sorts of information. There's also ways to set up a function where your LLM will be able to call into a database that you set up. Maybe you set up an endpoint for this database, and you give the LLM access to call it, and then it would be able to then use that in addition to all of its existing knowledge. It uses it for that single instance. So you're not giving your data to Google, you're not giving your data to whoever's powering the LLM. You're basically just asking LLM, please interpret this data for this one time, and then it doesn't store it. There we go. So the instructions at the top, and then the question and context in the prompt is basically how we get it to do what we want it to do. And then you can extend it as much as you want to from there, and chain requests and things like that. Okay, images. So this is where, like I mentioned earlier, it gets really cool. So you can feed it an image and then ask it a question, give it a prompt, and it can interpret the image. So you can see here, if you were to upload this image of a chocolate bar and a factory and say, guess the name of this movie, it'll respond with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And so you can start to see, oh yeah, there's a lot of cool gimmicks and maybe apps or websites that we could build that kind of take advantage of this multimodal type of prompt, which people tend to interact with better. If it's a web service you're creating, you don't necessarily need multimodal modality, but people tend to interact better with pictures than JSON. Here's another example. If you have a homework problem, or you see a riddle, or I mentioned earlier, you can translate, things like that. So you can pass in an image that represents some type of question, and then say, explain this to me. And the response is here, where it's basically explaining you how to solve this multivariable equation that's represented as a picture. And so it can teach you how to do it, because it said, show me every step along the way. Here's another example. I know this one's a little hard to read. Sorry, just replying to the thing. But it's a picture taken with a phone of a form that was filled out, and then the results shows up here in a nice JSON object. I'm sure some of us remember business cards, and some of us might even remember business card scanners and apps on our phones that existed prior to us just sharing our information using LinkedIn and things like that. But a business card scanner is essentially what this is here. Obviously, there's other ways to do OCR, but if you also need to do some interpretation, or in this case, you can see that it's actually handwriting. Handwriting might be messy, or you want the data normalized or formatted along the way, you could actually tell it that too. So in this case, you see the phone number has the spaces in it. You could say format phone numbers like this in the prompt, and then it'll format the phone numbers as part of this JSON. You could also say, please use only the following standard colors, black, beige, right, and not tan. And it should be able to then translate this to say black and beige instead of tan. Things like that. You could say provide age as a string, and then it'll be a string with quotes around it instead of a number, or provide it even as the written out form. So you want THREE, and you can do that. So you can not only read or parse the image into structured data, but transform that data along the way just by adding more information to your system instructions or to your prompt. There's even a way to pass in the actual JSON object you want. It's a little more advanced and it's harder to do, but it's well documented, and so you can do that too. But in this case, if the form is going to be the same every time, you could just say, turn it into JSON like this example shows. And this is something I do all the time. It makes it so much easier to take things in the real world and turn it into things that I want to use on my computer. Okay, so that was a very quick 30-minute run through of LLMs and Gemini. Next, we're going to go through the demo. Before I begin the demo, I want to make sure that we answer everyone's question if anyone has any questions. So I'm just going to quickly go through the chat and make sure we answered them all there. It looks like Marcia has been helping me, so thank you. Are there any questions on what I just went through that have not been answered yet? If there are, post it in the Q&A, please, and we will do our best to answer them. Otherwise, I will jump into demo mode.
Matt, I think one of the main questions people had was, how much of this can you do with the free version of Gemini?
I don't pay for anything.
There you go.
So I don't know if there's a free version of Gemini, but there's a free tier. So it's the paid version, but we're using it within the free tier, which means that we're not exceeding the limits that Google set. What I'm going to do is see if we can find it. I probably could ask Gemini, but
I posted that page in there already. I just wanted to make sure that was the same answer you had.
Yeah. So we'll kind of walk through this. So there's a couple different models. Now the models change over time because each time they create a model, that's the limit of the information that it has. So the first time that I did this this talk, and the first time I even saw this talk, there was no. I think Flash just came out. There was no 8B. I don't even know if 1.5 was out yet. And so over time, more models are being created. The models are being created for two reasons. One is for optimization. The other is also for more information to be in them. And so typically, if you're playing and you're concerned about pricing, you're going to want to probably use Flash because it is a lower cost one anyways, or basically I should say the limits are higher for Flash. But obviously, Pro is named Pro for a reason. So if what you're doing is really complex, you may need to use Pro to get the responses you're looking for. Again, if it's really for hobby and just for play, you don't need to worry. You can see here it's free of charge up to 1 million tokens of storage per hour. What does that mean? It's not something I can really explain, but imagine that each word was a token. That's kind of the gist of it. 1 million is a lot, and it's per hour. So that means worst case scenario, if you are doing something really complex, just don't do a lot of it per hour. Space it out, take your time, go for a walk every 30 minutes, right? Something like that, and you'll probably be okay. If we come back to AI Studio, you'll see here token count. I'm going to zoom out just a little because this is a little too zoomed in for me. Let's ask it a really complex question, and we'll see what the token count is, right? And let's start with we'll start with Flash B, sure, 8B. Maybe what I'll do is I'll come back to one of these prompts that we had earlier. How about this one here? Okay. And so I'm going to say, generate a short tip about Java. Good tips are short and contain a code. Example showing the tip. Here is an example to base your response on. I'll say it like that so we don't get the same example, right? And we'll hit run. And you'll see that was only 109. So If you were using this just for personal use, you're probably not going to hit the limit. Definitely not 1 million an hour. If you start to write code, and let's say you want to, like, I don't know, analyze the stock market every minute of the day or second of the day, then yeah, you might hit the limits. But you can see here, as a person typing, it's going to be really hard to even hit the limit. And I've yet to hit the limit just playing with it. The stuff I do for work, it's not accessible to the outside world, so no one else is going to call any of my prompts. I control when it runs, and so I try to make sure that it's always a human that's interacting with it, and that way we're limited by the speed by which we work as people, which tends to be a lot slower than machines. If you were to have a web service that talks to another web service, then yeah, you might have a problem if you had some bad code that was running too often. But yeah, so you should be okay from a hobbyist perspective. If we were to look at the Pro model, so this was 1 million per hour. Let's go look at Pro. You can see here it is a lot less than the rate limit. So I don't think I can show both at the same time. But you can see here, this is 15, this is 2. This is 1 million, this is 32,000. So significantly lower. And then we have 1,500 and we have 50. Again, significantly lower. So I would recommend trying to start with one of the Flash models. And that way you're less likely to hit the limit. If you find, again, that the nature of your prompt is so complex that the Flash model is not really doing a good job, then you could test out the prompt model, just test it once or twice, see is the response better. If it's not better, then maybe you can improve your prompt, and it's not the model that's really the issue. And so we'll do that today. We'll try different models. I think the questions we'll be asking will all get the same response, though, because in general, if it's a really simple prompt, you're probably going to get the same response. If you're interpreting documents and they're complex documents, or doing more advanced functionality where there is more variables involved in the input, then yeah, the models might make a difference. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so what I'm going to do is jump back here, and for the demo, we're going to be using all web-based. See if I can get there. Here we go. So we're going to be using a tool called Project IDX. If you're not familiar with Project IDX, it's a web-based IDE. So it's a web-based code editor provided by Google, and you can get to it by just going to idx.google.com. I'm going to go ahead and refresh this window because apparently it timed out, and you'll see it looks just like VS Code. So if you're familiar with VS Code already, you basically already know how to use Project IDX. In the README for the GitHub repo, I actually show you the steps on how to do this walkthrough with me. If you want to, you can also do it later on your own time, but the steps are actually provided right here. So we're going to open Project IDX. We're going to import a repo. Now, in this case, you can import this repo if you want to. I'll go ahead and paste it in the chat. You can also fork the repo if you want to, or create your own. But this create your own web service if you want to. Again, to interact with the API, we have to get the API key, and we do that by coming to here and clicking this Get API Key. The rest of it is pretty straightforward. Sorry, I'm just stalling while more questions. Okay. And here we go. Okay, so this is Project IDX. I'm going to close some of these tabs here, and you'll see this is just a node I did, and it has a web service in it. It looks just like VS Code, and you can actually install VS Code extensions. If we were to come here, you can see that we can install VS Code extensions. What's really nice is I work on a Chromebook, and so no matter where I am in the world, if I lose this Chromebook and I go to another one and I'll log in, I come back to this website, idx.google.com, and my project is right there. And because when you start using IDX, it asks you for the GitHub repo, it's tied to your repo, and I can commit and make changes right back to it. And that's what we're going to do, make some changes in here. We're going to publish that then to Cloud Run and Cloud Build. Let me quickly just go through the last couple slides, and then we'll just do demo the rest of the time. This is essentially the web service that we're going to use. You can see here, so it's an Express web service. Don't worry too much about that. I have a variable where I'm defining the model that I'm going to use. I'm going to use 1.5 Flash, but we can use any of the other models. And then here's my prompt. In this case, it's hard-coded, but in the actual web service, it's not. And you can see here, what is the capital of California? This is going to go talk to the Gemini API and get the response, and then output that response right here. So, I mean, that's not a lot of code, right? How many lines of code is that? And I've spaced it out to make it, readable. But we're talking about very little code to have your web service interact with the Gemini, or your app interact with the Gemini API. That's pretty easy. And if we were to go back to the AI Studio, it basically provided you with that code, so you don't even really need to know how to write it. So we can get working pretty quickly. I'm going to go through the steps, but just high level. What we're going to do is we're going to take this web service, which is going to be in my browser, in my IDE. We're going to deploy that to Google Cloud Run, which is a place where you can basically host your code and then just have it running on the internet, on Google's infrastructure. There's a generous free tier there as well. You can see here, the free tier. It is hard to translate into what does that mean for me, but CPU seconds per month and gigabyte seconds per month, and then million requests per month. Again, for hobbyist purposes, if you are the one clicking the button, you can't do this much in a month as a human. So you don't have to worry about it. You'll be within the free tier. And then we're going to use Google Cloud Build, which is a tool that will allow changes to a repository to automatically start a build process, an action, that publishes your changes to your Cloud Run instance, your Cloud Run service. And so what this means for me is, as a developer, I can just stay in this IDE all day long and commit to GitHub, make changes using our source control here. And I don't have to do anything else. The deployment is automatic. And so it's a lot faster to test changes. Okay, so this is my repo. This should match the repo exactly as you would see it on GitHub today. Here is my actual web service. Let me go ahead and make it a little bigger. And so there is a little more code than the example. Yes, I'll admit that, but that's because I made it a little more dynamic. So we have our Express variables here. This is just so the web service will run. We have the Google Gemini variables here. So this is the node module, and this is a feature available of it. I went ahead and set just a constant for a default model. You could set it to something else if you want to. Let's skip this function for a second. I'm going to jump down here. This is my get route. So in Express, I've defined that when I go to this page in my web browser, or by using a tool and doing a get function on it, which is the same as going to a web page, it's going to look to see, did I pass in any parameters? You can see, does the URL have a model parameter? Does it have a prompt parameter? And if it does, it's going to then pass that into my call Gemini function at the top that we'll come back to in a minute. I also created a post route. So if I'm using Postman or curl or something like that, and I want to do a post to this endpoint, it's going to look for those same attributes, prompt, model. In this case, I added another one. We're not going to get to that one today, but it'll pass it into the call Gemini function up above. And by the way, this is the bottom of the file. So it's 51 lines of code, and I probably could have condensed it. And then finally, we have our call Gemini function. This is my helper function I'm calling from both locations. So the first thing it does is it defines the model. So it basically says, OK, use the model that was specified. And then this is an optional one. You can specify more information for Pro. I don't believe this actually works in Flash, so we won't get to today. And then finally, this is the same as the screenshot in the PowerPoint. By the way, a PDF of the PowerPoint you can see is available in the GitHub repo. So all the slides are available in this GitHub repo. So it is very little code to interact with the Gemini API. And if you're passing in your model and you're passing in your prompt, you can use this one web service for everything that you want to do. I'm not saying that's the right choice to make. From a business perspective, it's probably not. But from a hobbyist perspective, it's kind of easy then, right? You have basically your own personal interface to interact with the Gemini API instead of using this interface, AIstudio.google, or instead of using oops, instead of using this interface. So this interface is not as powerful. This is more like your personal chat bot, where you're somewhat limited on what you can do, versus this interface, which is more of a developer interface, the AI Studio interface, where you can do a lot more, versus writing some code to do something very specific, including possibly augmenting it and chaining things and stuff like that. You would do that using code like this. Okay, so now that I have my web service, so this is functioning. I can actually watch this. I can open up Terminal, and I can say, actually, I don't even need to open up Terminal. Sorry. So built into Project IDX is a preview window, and I can come here. I can open the command palette, and I can say show web preview. And what it's going to do is going to actually create a web browser pointing at my web service. And you can see here, I know it's going to be hard to read, but it responded. Now, this is using my default prompt. If we look here, my default prompt is, how do I pass parameters into a URL? And this is basically explaining how to do that. I know it's hard to read, but it's machine readable, right? Because this is the response from a web service. Now, here's what's cool, though. I have a little option. Okay, here's how we can test it, right? So we can pass in a model and a prompt right here in this browser window. And there's the capital of California. And if I want to change this to what's the capital of South Carolina, it's Columbia. And so I can just use this to pass in models and things like that. Now, I could change it to a different model. I could change 1.5 Pro. The response is going to be the same. So, oh, look at that. The response is actually slightly different. Same information, but provided to me differently. So there's the difference. There you go. And similarly, we can do a post if we wanted to. That the instructions on how to do that is provided in the README, so you can get to that. We're short on time, so I'm going to skip past that. Okay. So I need to jump to Google Cloud. I'm already logged in. I'm going to go to Cloud Run. And what I want to do is create a service. And you can see here there's a couple options. I'm going to choose GitHub because this repo is on GitHub. And I don't think I've set up this particular repo yet. So I'm going to have to do that. I probably should have done that before the call. Oh, and I'm not authenticated either, even worse. Okay, let's see if I can do this quickly. Oh, I was already logged in, so I think we're moving fast. Okay, and I need to manage my connected repos. Let me go ahead and do that. I'm just going to add this repo. It popped up in another window, but rather than let you see all the repos that I have, oh, I think we're good. Okay. And so the name of this particular repo is Intro to Gemini. So if I type in Intro to Gemini, there it is. And what I'm basically telling Google is monitor this repo. When there's changes, build this service. And we could say this is a node. Oh, but I did not do a build back. I think we'll be okay. If not, I'll create one. Let's see. Okay. You can choose the name. You can see here, Intro to Gemini. Let me zoom in. You can see I can choose a location. I tend to do things that are lower in carbon footprint. We can choose that one for now. Now, if you're going to be choosing allow unauthenticated invocations, be aware the entire world may go to this and could cause you to have a lot of cost. So be very careful if you're exposing this to the world. I'm going to be deleting this service as soon as we're done with this call. Let's see if this works. It may not because I forgot to include a build.yaml, but we'll see. And while we're doing that, I'm going to see if I can find a build.yaml. You can also use a Docker file. So that's doing its thing. Now what I'm going to do is actually jump to Cloud Build because that process that we just set up is actually using Cloud Build to do it. So we'll see if we can get this to work. It might not. We'll find out. Now, this build process is similar if you're used to GitHub Actions. This is essentially the same type of script that's going on behind the scenes. In this case, Google's looking at my code and figuring out what it needs to do. Hopefully, it'll figure it out right, but it may not because I didn't actually provide it with any specific instructions. But that's what's happening right here. Is this is basically going through the steps, trying to figure out, can I build this node app for Matt? And while it's doing that, I will jump around, and we can see here the service is here. It's still not built, but we can at least see that it is in the process. What's neat is once it's running, we can come here, we can see the list of revisions, we can see logs, you can adjust security and all sorts of other stuff. And so this is a great place to have your apps running in a free tier if you keep things simple, without having to set up your own server or virtual machine or anything like that. So let's see. I should have done this like a cooking show. I apologize for not having one already up and running, but hopefully this will work. It says that it is possibly running. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click this URL and we'll see what happens. Nope, that didn't work. There's also one more thing that I think I have to do. In fact, I know I'm going to have to. If you'll remember, I have that API key. And so we can see here, API key. I'm going to have to provide that to the service in order for it to run. So I'm going to copy this. And let's see. Okay, it looks like it is running now. So if I click this one more time, I should get an error. It says service unavailable. That might be because of the API key. Let's go ahead and edit and deploy a new revision. Even if it's not working, I can at least demonstrate. So we can come here and put in a secret. Let's see if I can get my API key in a secure method so not everyone sees it, but I'll probably delete it anyways, just to be safe. Oh, actually, I do have it. I think I have it in a file that I can reference. Let me just get it real quick. Here we go. Lowercase. Let's try it one more time. Sorry. Okay, that's not working. Secret, enter secret manually, create new secret. Let's not do it as a secret then. Let's just do it as a variable, even though that's not the appropriate way to do it, but that's okay. Great, we'll do it that way. And then, oh, shoot, that was not. Let me edit and deploy one more time and adjust that. Okay, so it's API key 2. This is perfect because I actually need now to make adjustments to my code. So while that's deploying, let's come back to my code and I'll show you the changes. Oops, sorry. Okay, so anytime we want to make a change to the code, all we have to do now is make a change to the code and then commit it to my GitHub repo. So I'm going to change this to this here, and I'll hit save. And then what I'll do is come here and add this to stage changes, and I'll say updated the API key variable name and hit commit. And now before I hit sync, what I want to do is just show you what's happening behind the scenes. If we go to Cloud Build, right now nothing is building. Nothing is building, but I'm going to hit sync. Oh, I'm going to hit push. There we go. And if we look at my repo, we'll see that this branch just had a change. So I'm on a different branch. I'm not on the main branch. I'm going to go ahead and do a PR from this branch to main, create pull request, and merge it. And now if we come back to the build history, we can see that it automatically started building. So I don't have to worry about how to deploy. I don't have to worry about any of the commands needed to get things up onto Cloud Run. I have already connected it all in one swift maneuver just by creating that service basing it on my GitHub repo. And so I can focus just on my code, which is what I usually want to do. So that's building. While that's building, let's go ahead and click Cloud Run, and we can actually see our service, and we can see all the revisions. And what's great is if I were to deploy a change and realize I made a mistake and I need to revert, I can actually come back here and say, basically manage all traffic so that all traffic is coming back to this version instead. And so it's very easy to make changes. Now, hopefully you're testing. Oops. Hopefully you're testing, and so you're not going to introduce any mistakes. But if you did, and it's an emergency, this is a really easy way to go back. And there's some other powerful features you can use with this too. So I really love this tool. We have 1 minute. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get this working in time. Any questions though before we wrap up? I did say I would bring this back up. So let's do that too. There's that. And then if we can just jump back to that first slide, everyone will be able to get the links. So we'll do this. Here we go. I'll update the repo, so I'll undo the change that I just did. And then I'll also add the little note that we have to put in the API key as a secret, so that you'll have that information as well. But any questions otherwise? So once you have your web service up and running, you can now, use it just using the URL, like I did inside the IDX preview window, or use Postman or write some code or whatever it may be, build a mobile app, and call that endpoint. Again, I would recommend having some authentication in front of it so you're not exposing it to the world where someone might take advantage of you. And that way you won't have to worry about going over the free tier. But if you are building some type of, application that's going to be used by the whole world and the public and all that kind of stuff, soft launch, find out how often people are using it and what the cost is and stuff like that. There's a lot of use cases that people are using AI for that you don't necessarily have to use AI for. So OCR is a good example. We were talking about parsing PDFs and things like that. There are already libraries out there that do that don't require AI. And so it's something to explore if you're concerned about costs.
Someone had a question about they said it's the most recent question. I answered it, but I feel like, Matt, you might have a different or better answer. It said, in terms of cost, is this method the best for creating a project that you would want to have in your portfolio to display your work to potential employers?
So I think depending on the position you're going for, hopefully if you're interviewing with a technical person, they're just going to want to see your repo anyways. They're not necessarily going to need to see a functioning app or a functioning web page. But if you did want to allow the general public essentially to be able to go to your page and interact with it, I would recommend using a database behind the scenes to just keep track of how often it has been used. So if you put out some type of web page that will finish the poem, for instance, Rose is red, violets are blue, every time someone uses it, you should be recording to a database, okay, it was used at 1 p.m. on October 21st, for instance. And then when someone goes to the page, you can now query that database entry and determine, have I been used in the last hour? Now, if we go back to the limits, and I'll go ahead and pull it up, we had a lot of times that we could go to it per hour, right? So we're talking about 1 million tokens per minute, 1,500 requests per day, 15 requests per minute. So you would just keep track. If more than 15 people have used it, you would put a message on the screen that says, I'm sorry, you have to wait a minute. And that's the worst case scenario. The other thing that would be good about having the database, if you are exposing to the public, you'll know then if someone is taking advantage of it, because you'll say, hey, wait a minute, why is it being hit so often? Why is it being used so often? So that's what I would recommend if you're going to make it public. Otherwise, what you could do is put some type of password on it. If you're confident in your code, some type of authentication or something like that. And that way your prospective interviewer, you would just provide them, hey, here's a link to my portfolio. If you want to test out this project, please use the following password. And again, you would hopefully use a database to store that password and not just hard code it in your code, because your code should hopefully be up on a repo.
I think that was the only question we had that hadn't already gotten answered, unless anyone has more right now.
My info is available, so that my handle, the one Matt Kaufman, is for everything, everything that I'm on, I should say. So if you do have any follow-up questions, feel free to post there. You can also message the G2G group, and we'll make sure that I get back to you. Awesome.
Thank you, Matt. This was great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for attending.